True strength doesn't make you a better version of yourself. It makes you a different man entirely. That was Musashi's path. 60 undefeated duels, and from them, the Book of Five Rings. Not just about combat, but about the construction of an unshakable mind. The guy didn't write a manual for sword technique. He wrote a blueprint for becoming someone who can't be moved. Chapter 1. The Void. Destroying false strength. Most men think they're weak because they lack power. But weakness doesn't come from absence. It comes from false positions. You're living from an identity that was never yours. The job title you chase, the confidence you perform, the mask you wear at meetings. It's all borrowed. Society hands you a costume and you confuse it for your skin. You walk into a room thinking you're strong because you've got the right watch, the right handshake, the right laugh at the right jokes. But that's not you. That's a character you're playing. And the second the script changes, you fall apart. I've seen it 100 times. Guy gets promoted, thinks he's finally made it. Then the company restructures, his title evaporates, and suddenly he doesn't know who he is anymore. He wasn't strong, he was decorated. Strip away the decorations and there's nothing underneath. That's the danger of building your identity on things outside your control. Success itself is one of those masks, a system built to keep you chasing. The corner office, the six-figure salary, the validation from people who don't even know what they want. That's not mastery, that's captivity. Real power begins when no one can tell you what to think, want, or value. When you stop performing for an audience, you start becoming real. And being real is terrifying because it means standing alone. No applause, no safety net, just you and the ground beneath your feet. Musashi called this coup the void. Not emptiness as in meaninglessness, but emptiness as in removal. Stripping away everything that isn't real. Fake foundations, borrowed techniques, imagined strength. When you operate from a false base, real pressure will crush you. I remember talking to a friend, let's call him Takeshi, who thought he had it all figured out. Smart guy, charismatic, always had the room's attention. But when someone challenged him, really pushed back on his ideas, he crumbled. Got defensive, angry, then quiet. That's when I knew his confidence wasn't his. It was built on approval, not conviction. That's how you know your ground is fake. If the world stopped validating you tomorrow, would you still know who you are? Would you still have a center, or would you just drift? Most men drift. They spend their whole lives reacting to external pressure because they never built anything internal. They're like boats without anchors, getting tossed around by every wave, every opinion, every shift in the wind. Musashi understood this at a level most people never reach. He spent years as a masterless ronin, refusing every chance to borrow power from a clan. Clans offered him security, status, resources, everything a samurai was supposed to want, but he turned it all down. Why? Because he knew that the moment you accept borrowed power, you become dependent on it. You start protecting the institution instead of sharpening yourself. You become a cog in someone else's machine. So he chose emptiness instead. He walked alone, slept in fields, fought without a school or tradition to back him up. People thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. But in that emptiness, something crystallized. Everything that wasn't truly his, every technique he'd learned by rote, every belief he'd absorbed without questioning, every piece of identity that came from outside, it all got burned away, until only what was his remained. That's where real strength begins, not in adding more, but in subtracting everything that isn't truly yours. It's not about accumulating skills or credentials or connections. It's about finding out what's left when you strip all that away. And for most men, that process is terrifying. Because when you start peeling back the layers, you realize how little of you is actually you. How much is just programming, conditioning, borrowed ideas you never examined. But if you can survive that, if you can stand in the void and not run back to the comfort of false identities, then you start building something real. Something that can't be taken away. Something that doesn't collapse when the world stops clapping. That's what Musashi discovered, and that's what Bushido demands. Not just courage in battle, but the courage to face your own emptiness and build from there. Most men never do it. They spend their whole lives adding layers, building elaborate facades, hoping nobody notices the hollow core. And then they wonder why they feel so fragile, why success doesn't satisfy them, why they're always one setback away from falling apart. It's because they never did the real work. They never went into the void.
Chapter 2. The Elements. Building True Mastery. Once you strip away illusion, the next battle is finding your true terrain. Most men destroy themselves by fighting on battlefields not built for them. They see someone else winning and think, I need to do that. So they force themselves into shapes that don't fit, grinding away at skills that will never be natural, wondering why success feels like drowning. Musashi called this sui, the water, strength that adapts to its container, not out of weakness, but wisdom. Water doesn't fight the shape of the river. It fills it completely, moves through it with total efficiency. That's not surrender, that's intelligence. You're probably chasing a dream that requires strengths you don't have, ignoring the ones you do because they seem unimpressive. Maybe you're naturally observant, detail-oriented, patient, but the world keeps telling you to be bold, loud, aggressive. So you try to force yourself into that mold and it exhausts you. Meanwhile, your natural talents sit idle, atrophying, because you've been convinced they don't matter. That's how men lose themselves. They abandon their nature to chase someone else's definition of power. Real mastery comes when your nature and your path align, when what you're naturally good at becomes the foundation of what you build. Musashi wasn't just a swordsman. He painted, sculpted, practiced calligraphy, not for balance, but to define his own standard of power. He didn't care what other samurai thought mastery looked like. He built his own version, and because it was built on his actual nature, it was unshakable. I watched Takeshi go through this. He spent years trying to be someone he wasn't, louder, more aggressive, always pushing forward. It exhausted him. He'd win sometimes, but it cost him everything. Then one day, he stopped. He looked at what he was actually good at: foresight, strategy, reading situations 3 moves ahead. Not flashy, not impressive at first glance, but his. Once he started fighting from that ground, he stopped losing. Not because he got stronger, but because he stopped fighting on someone else's battlefield. Then comes chi, the ground, clarity of perception. Most men react to what's visible. Masters perceive what's beneath. You don't lose arguments because you're wrong. You lose because you react to the surface instead of reading the structure. Someone says something that sounds like an attack and you defend. But you missed the real move, the power play underneath the words, the positioning, the frame being set. You're fighting shadows while they're rearranging the board. Musashi called this difference ken and kan, seeing and perceiving. Ken is what your eyes register. Kan is what your mind understands. Weak men fight words. Strong men read the power dynamics underneath them. They see who's trying to dominate, who's deflecting, who's testing boundaries.
They don't react to the content, they respond to the structure. That's why they seem so calm in confrontations. They're not fighting the surface battle, they're operating 3 levels deeper. When you start asking, what's really happening here? You stop reacting and start controlling the flow. You see, the meeting isn't about the budget, it's about territory. The argument isn't about facts, it's about who gets to define reality. Once you see that, everything changes. You stop defending yourself against accusations and start shaping the frame. You stop justifying and start redirecting. That's Qi, standing on solid ground while everyone else scrambles on quicksand. After that comes Ka, the fire, timing. Power isn't force, it's rhythm. Amateurs strike when they feel ready. Masters strike when the world is. There's a beat to everything. Conversations, conflicts, negotiations, relationships. Most men are deaf to it. They push when resistance is high, retreat when opportunity is open, act out of their own anxiety instead of reading the moment. Then they wonder why nothing works, why effort doesn't translate to results. Musashi never forced an attack. He moved exactly when the opening appeared, not a heartbeat sooner, not a moment later. Perfect timing. And here's what people misunderstand. Timing isn't waiting passively. It's active stillness, poised, tuned, precise. You're not doing nothing. You're holding maximum readiness in suspension, every muscle coiled, every sense alert, waiting for the exact instant when action becomes inevitable. Then you move, and it feels effortless, because you're not fighting the current, you're riding it. Takeshi learned to read this rhythm, when to speak in meetings, when to make his move in negotiations, when to hold back and let others exhaust themselves. He stopped trying to control everything and started listening for the moment that the world was ready to move. That's when he became dangerous, not because he got more aggressive, but because his actions started landing with perfect timing. Power is not louder effort. It's strategic silence waiting for the world to open its own doors. Then comes the deepest element, Fudoshin, the immovable mind. Not calm, not control, stillness that nothing can move. Most people confuse this with being calm. They think it's about managing your emotions, staying composed under pressure. That's surface level. Fudoshin goes deeper. It's not about controlling your reactions. It's about having a center so solid that chaos moves around you, not through you. Calm is surface management, keeping your voice steady, your face neutral. Fudoshin is structural. It's building a core that doesn't shift no matter what happens outside. Someone insults you, threatens you, humiliates you, and something inside doesn't move. Not because you're suppressing the reaction, but because the center itself is beyond disturbance. That's what Musashi cultivated. That's what made him unbeatable. Not superior technique, superior groundedness. Most men have reactions disguised as composure. They look calm, but inside they're scrambling, defending, justifying. The real ones have a center that remains unbent, even under humiliation, doubt, or pressure. That's the final element. That's what turns technique into mastery. Because once your mind is immovable, everything else becomes possible. You can adapt like water, perceive like earth, strike like fire, all from a place that cannot be shaken.
Chapter 3: The Wind and the Void, Becoming Decided. Finally, you learn Fu, the wind, the flow where all principles move through you effortlessly, without thought, without hesitation. This is where everything you've built stops being technique and starts being nature. Musashi called this Shuhari, learn the form, break the form, transcend the form. It's a progression you can't rush, can't skip. Every stage is necessary. Form is not your prison, it's your path to freedom. The rules aren't there to limit you, they're there to build the foundation strong enough that you can eventually abandon them. At first, you think about every move, every reaction, every decision. That's Shu, the learning stage. You're conscious of everything. Should I say this? Is this the right move? What would Musashi do here? It's exhausting. You're hyper-aware, second-guessing, trying to remember principles while life is throwing punches. That's normal. That's how it starts. You're building the pathways, training your instincts, rewiring decades of conditioning. It feels mechanical because it is mechanical. You're still operating the machine manually. Then you start bending the rules. That's Ha, the breaking stage. You've internalized the principles enough that you can feel when to follow them and when to adapt. The forms become flexible. You're not just repeating what you learned, you're making it your own, testing boundaries, discovering what works for your specific nature and circumstances. This is where a lot of men get stuck. They mistake this stage for mastery. They think because they can improvise, they've arrived. But there's one more level. Eventually, there's no thought, no form, just movement. That's transcendence. That's mastery. You don't think about being strong, you just are. You don't calculate the right response, it emerges. The principles have dissolved into your being so completely that there's no separation between you and them. Someone challenges you, and the perfect response comes out before you even register the thought. That's when you know you've crossed over. Takashi lived this cycle, and I watched the whole thing. He practiced awareness, timing, detachment, consciously at first, painfully slow. Every interaction was work. He'd catch himself reacting emotionally and have to manually course correct. He'd miss the timing and replay the moment in his head for hours afterward. It was brutal to watch, honestly. But he kept going, didn't quit, didn't make excuses, just kept practicing, kept refining, kept building. Then one day something shifted. He stopped doing strength. He simply was it. I remember the exact moment I noticed. We were in a tense meeting, the kind where everyone's jockeying for position, trying to look smart, trying to dominate. Takashi just sat there, totally relaxed, totally present. Someone tried to undercut him, and his response was so smooth, so perfectly timed, that the whole room felt it. Not aggressive, not defensive, just solid, immovable. The guy who challenged him looked confused, like he'd punched a wall he didn't see coming. That's integration. It's invisible. It happens after repetition, not revelation. You don't suddenly get it one day. You just realize months later that you've become someone different. But Musashi's final lesson transcends mastery itself. Mushin, the no mind. At the height of his power, after 60 undefeated duels, after becoming the most feared swordsman in Japan, he stopped fighting entirely. Not because he was tired, not because he lost his edge, but because he no longer needed proof. The external battles were over. He had become the thing itself. Fighting would have been redundant. Like a mountain doesn't need to prove it's a mountain. It just is. That's what separates strong men from everyone else. Weak men are always becoming, always trying to prove something, chasing the next validation, the next win, the next confirmation that they're enough. They're in perpetual motion because they're running from doubt. Strong men have already decided. Their identity is not a question, it's an answer. They're not trying to become strong, they are strong. That decision is so final, so absolute, that it radiates from them without effort. When you're decided,
pressure stops existing as pressure. Challenges don't rattle you because you're not trying to protect a fragile self-image. The world bends around your center instead of collapsing it. You don't fight, you don't react, you simply are. And people feel that. They can't explain it, but they sense the difference. They sense that you're not performing, not pretending, not trying. You've settled into yourself so completely that there's nothing to attack, nothing to shake. Takashi's final moment looked like this. He walked into a room where he used to feel small. Same people, same dynamics, same setup, but everything was different because he was different. The people who once judged him, who once made him feel inadequate, felt his shift before he even spoke. The energy in the room rearranged itself around him, not because he was louder or more aggressive, but because his presence alone had weight now. That's power, when you don't have to do anything and the hierarchy shifts anyway. You started as someone life pushed around, someone reactive, uncertain, borrowing strength from external sources that could be taken away. But walk this path, strip away the false foundations, find your true terrain, build an immovable center, integrate the principles until they become you, and you become the man who's already decided. Not becoming, not trying, decided. And everyone will sense it before you even speak. They'll feel the ground you're standing on and know, instinctively, that it can't be moved. That's the path Musashi walked. That's the path Bushido demands. Not violence, not domination, just absolute clarity about who you are, built on truth instead of illusion. When you get there, you'll know, because the world will stop pushing you around and you'll finally understand why. If this resonates with you, if you're tired of borrowed strength and ready to build something real, stick around. There's more to explore, more principles, more battles, more ways to forge an unshakable mind. Subscribe and let's walk this path together. Not because I have all the answers, but because the journey itself sharpens you. And that's what matters.